So, very good evening to all of you. Um Again, last week we had talked about upper GI bleeding, and today we will talk about lower GI bleeding. So, as usual, a small message to postgraduates. Every teacher once was a student. Every winner was a once was a loser. Every expert once was a beginner. But all of them have crossed the bridge called as learning. Postgraduates, you should be happy. We have learning general surgery on bridge here. So thank you, Dr. Patta Radhakrishna, for giving this opportunity, and I hope that this will benefit the postgraduate and others. So as usual, these are my contents. Introduction, lower GI bleeding. Most importantly, here it's a small intestinal and large intestinal. In upper GI, we have discussed as a variceal and non-variceal, and these are the usual headings. And last, I have one or two case capsules. Some statistics here, which is quite common, but the important thing to realize that slowly the trend of this upper GI getting admitted is becoming less and less, and lower GI cases are you find more cases. And elderly patients, usually they have more than 50% of the GI hemorrhage occurs in them. They carry poor prognosis. And when it comes to the lower GI, when you say colonic, diverticulosis is the most common cause, and followed by angiodysplasia. We'll be going to hear about all those things. So when we define the lower GI, usual refers from the ligament of Treats, so till the anal canal. So even here you can have a hematochezia, means or passage of even maroon colored blood or even blood clots. But it's important, all cases of lower GI bleed, the upper GI bleeding has to be ruled out, because sometimes it can be so massive, so portal hypertension or even a duodenal ulcer. A simple nasogastric tube and a lavage may give you an idea that probably this is not upper GI bleeding. In fact, earlier days, a lot of mistakes also happened here, missing totally a upper GI bleeding. So these are few definitions. So acute is the one which requires admission and resuscitation. Whether you resuscitate in the form of fluids or blood, different. So when you lose more than 1,500 blood in 24 hours or 25% of intravascular blood volume loss, it is called as massive. And severe, can see there more than 2 units of red blood cells, or hematocrit less than 20% loss, or recurrent bleed after even 24 hours of stability. That's also called as a severe bleeding. So then what is obscure? So one of the important areas of which we'll be talking little more today is the obscure bleed. Obscure, I have also mentioned this when I took the upper GI, like Dulophi lesions, etc. But these have got more relevance in the intestinal bleed. So this bleed is also called as now mid GI bleed. So mid GI bleed refers to ligament of Treats till the eye. So it can be an obscure, can be an occult. What happens in iron deficiency anemia? Fecal occult blood is positive, no visible bleeding. It can still be called as obscure occult. But then obscure bleeding can also be a recurrent when you see, and sometimes you get it as a visible. It's called as obscure but overt. So when the initial evaluation you have done upper GI-scopy, colonoscopy, it has failed, then you call it as a obscure bleeding. I hope it is very clear. So this you should know, especially when you tackle the small intestinal bleeds. So list is big here, but only just want to give you a percentage. Numbers may vary, but diverticulosis is an important topic which today we'll be discussing. You have this severe other cause of colitis, we'll be talking about that, and ischemia are there. But this group is also important, what has been called unknown. Slowly this is becoming less and less, because more sophisticated investigations you use and more repeated investigations you use, this unknown, also called as a indeterminate group, this number will become less and less. So then here we have got so many other causes, so we'll all discuss this today. So don't get frightened by looking at this just obscure causes of the entire GAT. Upper GI, forget about that now. See here, so list is very big. So we shall not talk about HIV related causes, metastatic disease, lymphoma, sarcoidosis, endometriosis. So this is not important, but for completion sake I have given. But what is more important is this. So it really does not matter how much knowledge you have by hearting all these 50 causes, but what is important is in your wisdom, which lies in application of your knowledge in a given case, what exactly is the problem. So that is what we will concentrate today. So this is the some of the important conditions which we'll be talking. So individually we'll go about this, depends upon their importance of this each one I'll be discussing. Also remember the medical causes always, that has to be kept in mind. So whether it's a purpura or a bleeding disorders, any evaluation of a GI bleed, medical causes have to be ruled out, and I take it for granted and understand that you are ruled out the medical causes, and then only will be investigated. So quick evaluation of these patients. Evaluation as well as resuscitation both should go simultaneously. As I mentioned to you, put a nasogastric tube in a massive bleed case and say that upper GI bleeding is not the cause, and triad them more importantly in a casualty. If the patient is very acutely sick, admission and resuscitation, is he stable, does he require an ICU, that is what is important there. And endoscopies, I mentioned to you last time about the upper GI scopy. Some same principles apply in colonoscopy also, with a little variation, only after stabilization. And then you should know when to order some special investigations and treat accordingly. If this patient gives a recurrent history, obviously that means he is having some problem there. Like in upper GI we talk about varices, in the lower GI he may be having multiple polyps. You would have come for one polyp removal, you would have done another polyp, or a case of Peutz-Jeghers syndrome might have been missed. So recurrent history will help you that. And comorbidities are important. Very often elderly patients are taking aspirin, they are taking anticoagulants, they are taking NSAIDs. They are not only cause erosive gastritis and even NSAID ulcers in the small intestine, but they also can give rise to antiplatelet. They have got some mechanism in which they derange the coagulation profile. So that's important here. If there's a pain associated with the bleeding, it could be some kind of either a necrotizing colitis or ischemic colitis, mesenteric ischemia. And if there's a painless, obviously starting from hemorrhoids, carcinoma colon, many notoriously the small bowel bleeds are painless. And so any weight loss means obviously having some chronic disease, can be tuberculosis, can be ulcerative colitis, can be Crohn's, or why not even malignancy. So here patient has come to the casualty, you quickly decides on the volume loss by a simple orthostatic hypotension, means you make the patient lie down and sitting position, or of course don't make the patient stand, he may collapse there, it's important. So depending upon which, a decrease in the systolic pressure of more than 20 millimeters of mercury or a diastolic of 10 means it could be having a orthostatic hypotension. And in the supine position himself has hypotension, means there's a big loss of 40%. So simple things in casualty, you should be able to decide what type of bleeding he is having. And so these are the quick checks there: anemia, RT showing blood there, purpuric patches, Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, melanosis, or a stomatitis indicative of a chronic anemia. Yes, you also should be able to, postgraduate should know, it's not called as mild, moderate, severe. hemorrhage. Now it's called a class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4. Easy to remember as 10, 20, 30, 40, may not be 100% correct. So at early stage, there is only a mild tachycardia, and then you see slowly find the pale extremities. Is complaining of thirst, means about 20-25% also would have lost. And in the class 3, usually you find all this tachycardia, hypotension, etc., etc. And last is the class 4, means he has lost more than 40% of the blood volume. So this is how we quickly assess them. And in upper GI bleeding could get a lot of predictors. These are important predictors. Quickly you should be able to, at a postgraduate level, should know which are the one which are severe, acute. I'm talking about acute lower GI at casualty. So these are the things which everyone does: heart rate, blood pressure, see, syncope, and you have palpated the abdomen, it's non-tender, rectal bleeding in the first 4 hours, aspirin, and if he has got a 2 more or comorbid condition, including cardiac, renal, etc. So this is the indication that probably is going to have a severe acute lower GI bleeding. So this is the same principle to be done in emergency situation, whether it's upper GI or lower GI. The cannulas, treatment of the shock, nasogastric tube I mentioned, it's if necessary only. If you are very sure it's lower GI, it's not required. If there's vomiting, definitely we'll use it. And catheterization, etc. Last time I mentioned to you that if you are not able to get the IV lines intraosseous route, that's it through the bones, tibia, one of the flat bones you can select there, like tibia having a big marrow there, so it can take. So these are the few important things which you do at the resuscitation. And about the blood, I mentioned about a group O negative blood. And of course, generally endotracheal intubation is not necessary unless patient has got such severe massive bleeding where you may have to get ready for some important investigations. You should not die of even aspiration, etc. So some of these patients may be also having a liver disease, so the reason why you may have to intubate them also. So it's important that you need to give lot of packed cells, and you may have to give in addition platelets and fresh frozen plasma. Some of the things I am repeating what I said last time because of some postgraduates might not have been able to attend last time. And this is what is called a restrictive transfusion. So don't try to give the blood if it is 8 grams or something like that. So around 7 to 8 is still tolerable, but you may have to decide depending upon your patient. If patient is very elderly, may not tolerate even 7, you may have to give the blood. So all depends upon your case. So this is a restrictive usage of the blood, not liberal use of the blood. So then you start with the investigations. You are resuscitated the patient, and you have done this coagulation, nasogastric tube, rectal examination. I mentioned to you that very important, you put a nasogastric tube, okay, no blood, he has got a GI bleeding, this is an emergency bleed. So do a PR examination to see actually nature of the blood. A red colored blood itself an indication of fresh blood or an altered blood. It's a little bit of foul odor there. It could be suggestion of a gangrene of the intestine, or a little bit of maroon may suggest a bleed maybe from the small intestine or maybe from the right, including the Meckel's. With mucus means it can be easily go for a dysentery. So these are few observations which you should do. And proctoscopy, obviously never miss hemorrhoids or varices there. And you have to get ready for colonoscopy if the patient becomes stable. So that's what we have done here. So all these things, including I mentioned about the liver disease if patient has got. So get ready with the LFT there. So if necessary, a platelet transfusion also required if it is less than 50,000 cells per cubic millimeter. So now there are a few important observations here you should remember. Whenever you find a microcytic red blood cell iron deficiency anemia, you should think of. This is a patient who has got a stabilized patient or a chronic blood loss patient, right? But because patient with acute blood normally have normocytic blood cells. So a quick smear can tell you whether he is having a chronic anemia and then acute he has developed, or only acute by simple smear examination here. And unlike the patients with the acute GI bleed, patient with the lower GI bleed and normal renal perfusion, they have normal blood urea, nitrogen, creatinine. This is an important observation you should know to differentiate quickly between the upper GI and the lower GI. So all of you know that colonoscopy still forms the number one investigation of a choice in a GI bleed and you suspect from the colon, because when a patient has come with the massive bleed, that's what we are now right now. Main concentration is on massive bleed from the lower GI, especially colon. So something which you can accessible. So you can use the preparation here. That's polyethylene glycol. All of you know. Try to do it only within 24 hours. But there are some reports of high risk patients because they may not tolerate the massive bleed, hypotension, shock. So there are some suggestion of doing a scopy even without a preparation. We'll come to that. But there is a problem of this diagnostic yield. You know, it can go from here to 90%. Some angiodysplasia may not bleed at all when you do the colonoscopy. So few important observations here. It's important that you observe not only during introduction. While introduction, some area you might not have blood, but when you are withdrawing the colonoscopy, it may start bleeding. So you observe them both. And of course, the expert should always read the terminal ileum, because that is the one area the bleeding, if it occurs, can be easily missed. So these are the few things you should know about the colonoscopy. As I mentioned, if you are forced to do a colonoscopy on an unprepared colon, that's called a hydroflush therapy. So what it means to say is that 3 1-liter tap water enemas you can use, and there's a water jet pump irrigation system with a mechanical suction. Remember, this is not a substitute for a good colonoscopy, but this is only an alternative investigation. So as I mentioned to you, yield of colonoscopy is somewhere here, depends upon your expertization, how many times you are able to read the terminal ileum, and about the, are you able to identify the bleeder or not. So that's important here. If you are done a colonoscopy and if you are able to get those high risk stigmata, that's important here. Greatest advantage of the colonoscopy is that diagnostic and hemostasis. So if you see a spurting vessel, or even if you see a vessel which may not be bleeding at this junction, but it's better that you treat, or even there could be adherent clot. So all these things need to be treated. So like clips or even a argon plasma coagulation, and polypectomy bleeds are quite common in the USA. I'm not sure about our country here. So these post-polypectomy bleeds also can be managed either with the clip or a contact thermal, or even a argon plasma coagulation, or even epinephrine. Little more details, we'll see it later. So important is that role of colonoscopy, right? So up to now, whatever we have spoken is a general discussion of management in casualty, resuscitation of an emergency patient, starting of an IV line, quickly to differentiate an upper GI from lower GI, nasogastric tube introduction, and even I mentioned about the blood urea creatinine clearance that also mentioned. So we have got some conclusion with this background. Now we'll come to a small intestinal bleed. They are also called as mid-GI bleed. Remember, they are very popularly called as causes for obscure mid-GI bleeding. I repeat what I said in the beginning. Obscure means you have done one upper GI scopy normal, colonoscopy is normal. Again, patient has started bleeding now. So this situation, we call it as a obscure, right? So I will not be discussing too many things about, this is not the class on Meckel diverticulum or individually this, but this is mainly we are talking about how these are the common causes and how to make a diagnosis of these conditions. Small bowel is actually called a dark continent. You know that inaccessibility. It's because of the intraperitoneal location. So much mobility, so much length. 6 meters length is not easy for anyone to visualize every part of the small intestine. So that's why it's called as the dark continent. So when you are not able to get a diagnosis on a GI bleeding, remember this dark continent always. But still remember it costs only 1%. Whenever you have a patient who has multiple admissions, multiple transfusions, multiple diagnostic procedures, means suspect that. And if the source of bleeding is mostly it is from the ampulla vater to terminal ileum, it's nowadays it's called mid GI. So it's upper GI, mid GI, and actually lower GI. This is how classification. So again, don't get worried about too many things here, but as I mentioned in the first slide, it is your wisdom that is important. If your patient is a 15-year-old boy, you would like to as well think for a Meckel's diverticulum. You don't think in terms of this side list. You see this list. Other way, if your patient is 60-year-old person, don't say in casualty, I will consider Meckel's diverticulum. You have got enough thing to, other things are important here. And I will repeat at this stage, this angiodysplasias are also called as the vascular causes. You can see here later, vascular anomaly written here. These are actually angiodysplasias are not congenital, they are acquired lesions. This has to be kept in mind. This will give you some idea that these are the various causes for the. So how to make a diagnosis of a Meckel's diverticulum? As I mentioned to you, in a GI bleed in a child, anybody will probably think as a first possibility of a Meckel's. But in a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old, it's difficult to suspect. It is by exclusion that you have ruled out the upper GI and the lower GI common causes. A young child or a boy or a girl with anemia, a kind of, I mentioned, a maroon blood, abdominal examination may not reveal anything, but if you are lucky, sometimes if the vitalointestinal duct anomaly, it's an anomaly of the VI duct, you may be able to get a deformed umbilicus. That is a brilliant clinical judgment by one of my professors who did it. So you can suspect a Meckel's diverticulum, and it is a notorious for a obscure GI bleed, right? Yes. So younger patient means you think of a Meckel's diverticulum, but still it's more than 50% of the cases, remember, in a young child. So because of the ectopic acid secreting mucosa, that is why ulceration and you get a GI bleed. So if you suspect, easy investigation of a choice in case if it is bleeding is the tagged RBC scan of 99 pertechnate scan, because this is specifically taken by the ectopic gastric mucosa, and so it can localize very well with the scintigraphy. So you make a diagnosis of a Meckel's diverticular bleed. So in a Mayo Clinic study of 1,476 patients, is a large study of a Meckel's diverticulum. You can see there only 16% of them were symptomatic, and bleeding is the most common presentation, and you can see the sensitivity quite high of a Meckel's. But in children it is like this, but in adults you look at that. So sensitivity of the even RBC scan, tagged scan, it comes down because they have a lesser gastric mucosa. So you need to have other forms of investigations for a Meckel's diverticulum. So do you have any other investigation? Yes, there is. You can do an angiogram. It's difficult, but sometimes if you have a careful interventional radiologist, one who is expert in that, you should be able to find out an artery which is beyond the course of a jejunal branch. You know these arterial branches of the jejunum and ileum have got some kind of an arcade. So this artery does not join that jejunal arcades. They are separate arteries, and that artery should end with one blind-ended stump. And interestingly, there's no extravasation. So these are some of the important points, fine points. After all, it is because of the presence of persistent vitelline artery. If you get this picture, I think you can conclusively say it is a Meckel's diverticular bleed. So this is not the investigation of a choice for you, but in case of an adult, if RBC TAT scan, because at the time of scan it may not be bleeding, so that is the reason why you have a alternative method. So these are the figures here. When you see a diverticulum, just for the sake of postgraduates, that just don't remove only the diverticulum, some adjacent portion of the intestine, at least 2 centimeter both sides, because that may contain that ectopic gastric tissue. So this is a Meckel's diverticulum and its treatment. Small intestine is notorious for many ulcers and tumors. So you know that tuberculosis, Crohn's disease, non-specific enteritis common there. You also know that after the stomach, small intestine also is quite common for the GIST. They are the gastrointestinal stomal tumors. Yes, in a patient who has got a GI bleed, you do a clinical examination, you have not found anything, they are the obscure bleeds I mentioned to you. If you suspect a tumor, you can always ask for a CT scan. Otherwise, the investigations are slightly different here, and today they are better visualized by video capsule endoscopy, also called as capsule endoscopy. These are the very small capsules, some measurements here mentioned. So just patient have to have some 8-hour fast, easy no to take it, he swallows that, and by the peristalsis it goes on sending images even per second, 1 or 2 there. So you can go on up to even 6 to 8 hours I mentioned to you. And very often they say they are tolerated well, so very useful in iron deficiency anemia. But there are a few limitations and problems of this, because one is the time consuming. You know that you should have a lot of patience here for a patient as well as the surgeon or a gastroenterologist, and you need to watch, because that is the most important thing here. And if the patient is hemodynamically stable, it is, and he has to bleed, but hemodynamically unstable, and if he is not bleeding, again a failure. But a patient who has got a stricture, for some reason it could be a tuberculosis or a Crohn's, you are investigating and there is a stricture, you would have missed probably a partial obstruction by not taking the history properly, and this will be a failure. So these are some of the points to be remembered for a capsule endoscopy. However, you look at the yield here, you know, compared to barium studies, it is much better. But you have a CT here, see here, compared to the CT scan for all these small ulcers, still better than a CT scan. CT scan role comes only when there's a definite mass lesions. But for a non-specific ulcers, inflammatory diseases, Crohn's, tuberculosis, early cases, even a mesenteric angiography, if you compare, this is better. So what I'm trying to tell is capsule endoscopy has a definite role, one who can tolerate it, and recurrent bleeding, but it has to bleed. So each investigation has to be zeroed down to whatever your patient requires. So you have done the capsule endoscopy also. Let us say a case of a small ulcerative lesion in the mid-jejunum, CT normal, and capsule endoscopy. Many of you know may not have facility, or it is also during the capsule endoscopy it was not bleeding. You have any other options? Yes, small bowel endoscopy, it's also called enteroscopy. So again, few things are written here. You can put a pediatric scope here, or sometimes what we can do is even it's called a push enteroscopy. You can go up to even, you know, it's you can reach up to the terminal ileum here, and they attach a sonde type of a scopes with a balloon there. It's called a balloon endoscopy or double balloon endoscopies. They can easily go up to the distal bowel, but problem is, is a very cumbersome and does not permit intervention. The most important thing here is, in addition to the diagnosis, you need to do something intervention here. So today this is abundant with the advent of a capsule endoscopy, right? So when you have got a capsule endoscopy, now small bowel enteroclysis is nothing but, earlier we used to do barium meal follow through. The yield is there, it is not good and more cumbersome again. So here is the, with the tube, barium is directly, it goes into the jejunum there with the methyl cellulose. It's a better. If you suspect a large tumors or strictures, yes, it can give a diagnosis, but again limitation is there. So angiodysplasia, one of the very common site is small intestine, and we are talking about obscure bleeding. This is not a good choice, but we should know as a cause of as investigation. I would like to talk little more details about this little later when I take the differential diagnosis. You see that a patient who has got a chronic anemia, nothing was palpable, and that time we did not have enteroscopy, but a small bowel radiology has picked up a mass, a diverticulum there. Interestingly, this is not Meckel's diverticulum. This is a diverticulum at the, not in the anti-mesenteric border, it is in the mesenteric border. And this is another case of a tuberculosis causing a stricture. This is just to show you, but remember one thing, small bowel radiography is not done much nowadays. Just to give you some pictures, it's easy to suspect a tuberculosis. I think in Indian scenario, most of them will come at the time of some clue is there, either a chest or maybe either you can have a chest x-ray showing a pulmonary tuberculosis or some weight loss, fever. So that is the time we need to suspect tuberculosis, but advanced cases with this peristalsis and some, you can see a colonoscopy showing this nodules there. You can see a tuberculosis dilated segment. So we don't require actually a major, you can palpate ultrasound and CT will give a diagnosis. So you can see here, this is a case which I was referring to, and this is that stricture which has been resected. So early cases can be diagnosed by enteroscopy and biopsy if you have a high suspicion. So surgery can be avoided, treatment can be started early. Enteric perforation, I have just for the sake of completion's sake, often we get a reference from the Department of Medicine where patient is undergoing treatment, both complication. In fact, a perforation may have manifested as a bleeding, and but remember, occult blood is almost present in almost all cases of a enteric fever with the involvement of the terminal ileum. So this is one of the causes to be remembered in Indian scenario. There are some cases may not have a massive gangrene, but occasionally bleeding. This could be confined to one segment of the intestine. This is intestinal ischemia. So you need to have at least the 0.5 ml per minute is the bleeding here. Angiograms cannot give an etiology. There's a risk of a dye allergy. All of you know the contrast causing allergy as well as a renal failure. So this is one of the problems of this obscure bleeds here. So RBC tide scans can be tried, even a capsule can be tried. But you know the greatest advantage is that selective embolization of the artery. This is one of our cases which had a GI bleed, very missed because initially the superior mesenteric artery area, everything was normal, but later we realized and there was some tenderness developing, explored, and this was the picture. So we have talked about tubercular ulcers. We have talked about a few other leiomyomas. Now we'll come to that small bowel tumors. Small bowel tumors are the second common cause. Adenocarcinoma is the most common primary malignancy of the small bowel. Look at that. There are some neuroendocrine tumors, lymphoma. I am not give much importance to that. So these are popularly called the GIST. Stomach is the most common site, and followed by, you can see here, this is the massive GIST here with the spread into the peritoneal cavity here. This is how the classical presentation, and this is another presentation. Usually it is the submucosal lesion with the mucosal ulceration which causes bleeding either by compression, ischemia, or infiltration. So this is the gastrointestinal stromal tumors. I was talking to you about the diverticulae. See, this is uncommon, but this is in the mesenteric border, not in the antimesenteric border like Meckel's. Sometimes they can be multiple, but even a one divertically, we had a patient who has seen several physicians and surgeons, several scopies, and missed, and even a CT could not pick up that divertically, but a barium picked up this. Bleeding, anasarca, perforations are the common complications. This was that some food particles, get the inspissated there and can give rise to the infection, and sometimes abdominal pain and bleeding. That is the reason why they come. These are small bowel diverticulae. Now, intraoperative endoscopy. Sometimes what happens is you have done all these things, but still you have failed. You have done even a capsule. At the time of the capsule endoscopy, there was no bleeding. We have done all possible other investigations and everything has failed. So that is the time you consider intraoperative endoscopy. This is indicated if there is a transfusion dependent bleeding. You have done everything, so done a laparotomy now. Put a pediatric scope, or you can put even make an enterotomy and put the scope there. And it's basically you are telescoping the small bowel of the scope. Remember, it is 6 meters. Suspicious area you can mark it endoscopically, and better that area to be resected. Usually in a laparotomy, what we used to do is the clamping the small portion of the bowel into segmentation, so that we need to know where the blood is accumulating more. So this is how it is done. So evaluation can go up to tissue biopsy, polypectomy, hemostasis. All this can be done by a push enteroscopy. Even on the table also you can do that. This is the picture intraoperative endoscopy. Look at that, how the bowel gets dilated there. And this is what actually our case only so much time consuming, and the suspicion area was found out and it was resected. It was turned out to be angiodysplasia. So this is what is the very testing the patience of everyone here. So this is intraoperative endoscopy. So as a mid intestinal bleed, these are the important things which every postgraduate should know, starting from simple tests, ruling out the upper GI and lower GI. Then comes the capsules, then comes the endoscopy, there comes the intraoperative endoscopy. So these are enteroscopy, enteroclysis. That is nothing but the small bowel enema. So this is the various investigations. This is the pictures, and you should be able to get a diagnosis. So we'll come to the angiodysplasia. I'll be talking more about it when I take the colon, because cecum is the most common site. However, it is one of the important causes for obscure small intestine bleed in more than 40% of the patients in elderly. So to again repeat to you that this is not congenital, this is acquired, and only in 10% of the young patients you see. So what is important here is the diagnosis and endoscopic, if you are able to pick up that lesion, and treatment is a resection or endoscopic control of the hemorrhage if it is possible. Otherwise, resection will give you a histological diagnosis and you will confirm it. By chance, if you have done a laparotomy or even a diagnostic laparoscope, if you are able to pick up this lesion by push enteroscopies, better is the resection is the treatment. So, Dr. Radhakrishna can I ask any postgraduate if anybody is there? Just a quick.
Yes, sure, sir. There are many. If
Quick.
anybody wants to volunteer.
It's simple. Don't worry. Postgraduates should not hesitate.
Anyone, please?
Niveda here.
Yeah, please. Can you read that? You have, I think, muted. So
Yeah, Niveda, you unmute and then please read the slide.
I think the sound.
Can you unmute, Niveda?
Okay, I think there's some problem.
Aruna?
Hello, sir. 50. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening. Good evening. Please go ahead.
A 50-year-old male presented with anemia, fatigue, and found to have occult blood in stools. Gastroscopy and colonoscopy were normal, so no mass was palpable. It
Yeah.
looks like it's an obscure GI bleeding, sir.
Very good. What are the 1, 2, 3 possibilities you would like to consider? Yes.
Anemia, fatigue. It could be an early stage of carcinoma also, sir. Where
Carcinoma of what?
colon.
See, I have told you we are talking about obscure. We are right now in the small intestine, so we have narrowed down our diagnosis. But so carcinoma of the small intestine, not that you can't get it; it is not common. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Any other things? 50-year. Okay, you would like to consider few diagnoses. What you said is true. Can you read this CT? Just concentrate somewhere here. I don't have many images, but somewhere here. This is stomach and this is duodenum. Just see here.
Sir.
Can you see something there? I know whether how much you can able to see properly in your laptop or mobile phones.
So is it the proximal jejunum?
Very good.
Which proximal, and there's a mass which has been formed around the proximal jejunum, and with is it an air foci within that, sir?
Yeah, that is the normal air foci there.
Air foci.
So this is the correct. What you are telling is correct. And he was subjected for a push enteroscopy. You know what is push enteroscopy? What is this called as?
So this is the balloon, sir. This is the
Double
enteroscope.
balloon. This is called a double balloon. Yes. Can you read some findings there? Just look at that. Look at this and versus red. This is normal. So this is a slough like a ulcerative lesion. Okay. This is a typical look of a malignant ulcer. And he took a biopsy of that and it came as adenocarcinoma. Your prediction is correct. So the purpose of putting this slide is anyway, thank you. You can mute now. So,
thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, slide is put to tell you 1 or 2 things about this double balloon, use of double balloon scope. Even when the mass is not palpable, CT has shown this, and endoscopy has shown the advantage of even a biopsy and a resection of this involved segment. We did a scope that time. The serosa was involved here. You can see there, and laparotomy, resection, and adjoining portion. This is not the final picture. Actually, this was cut for this sake. Otherwise, it was a little bigger. Intestine was taken out, and lymph nodes are also cleared in that vicinity. Small intestinal tumors are rare because more of immunogenic activity and rapid peristalsis. So here you can make out all these are the risk factors for a small intestinal malignancy, including Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, even polyposis coli. So these are all the things to be kept in mind, right? Okay. So you have still one more weapon with you. Last is diagnostic laparoscopy. Remember, you have done everything. So still you are not happy. Patient has got a bleed. You rule out that it is not from the colon, from the upper GI. There could be a possibility, and you can put a scope. Small leiomyomas sometimes can be missed, as I mentioned to you. they may be missed because of they are not bleeding at the time of a capsule endoscopy or even a enteroscopy. So a tumor can project like this during the scope here, no harm is done. And if you are able to get it again, you can do what is called a transparency and transillumination and segmentation by clamping the one, or if there is a doubt, clamping the 1 or 2 segments and see where the blood is accumulating. So these are all the points which will help you in the diagnosis of a occult bleed or obscure bleed from the small bowel, right? So this is the usual chart mentioned here. The first important thing is upper GI-scopy. Okay, positive means he goes for this side. Whenever is negative, capsule endoscopy is tolerated very well, except for the stricture and obstruction. If it is positive, treat accordingly. But remember, it cannot take a biopsy. So that is one disadvantage. But that's where the double balloon or a push enteroscopist will help. I have told you the disadvantage of that, tolerating and all that become difficult. Now, if it is negative, active bleeding means you got an angiogram or even scintigram. I mentioned to you, especially Meckel's if you suspect. If there's no active bleeding, see here comes the push enteroscopy here. So capsule should be tried first because it is non-invasive. This is invasive and still negative. Then I mentioned to you about the last slide, diagnostic laparoscopy and intraoperative enteroscopy. So this we have done in one case which I told you about how that it's a very tedious procedure. But as I mentioned in the earlier slides, don't forget scans. You suspect a mass or you have any suspicion, nothing like a CT scan which can detect the mass, location, lymph nodes, infiltration, and may decide your further management, right? So thus we have completed the list, that is the small intestinal bleeding. If anybody has asked, can ask 1 or 2 or questions related to up to now small intestinal bleed, I am happy to answer. If you have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, please.
Sir, is there a role for deep enteroscopes like these spiral enteroscopes and double and single balloon enteroscopes? But they say that though it moves along with the peristalsis, but it's not commonly used in practice, right, sir?
I have already mentioned that most of them are abandoned or sometimes they are not done. But this is a facility which is available in exceptional situations where you don't know what to do. Sometimes a laparotomy has been done and they have dissected even a wrong segment of the bowel. So GI bleeds are sometimes very, very difficult because many times night, sometimes it happens, sometimes you may not have facility. When you are done a CT angiogram, it is not bleeding, Meckel's is missed. So this is one of the investigation which is available. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, one more question.
Yeah.
If the patient is on blood thinners and sometimes they do present in the ICU with an altered INR, and when you put a scope inside, everything is red, clots is coming, light of the scope cannot be passed due to redness, and there is a diffuse bleeding all around. So how to approach in such cases, sir?
This situation I am understanding it is for colon, I suppose, colon, because you said put the scope, because we are talking today small intestinal and large intestinal bleed. You may have to wait there, you have to correct the INR there, you have to give the patient may be in coagulopathy. So first you have to correct there. I have given in earlier slides about the fresh frozen plasma, etc., and blood transfusions. And I mentioned if you cannot do the colonoscopy, patient requires a colonoscopy in preparation, and if it is very urgent, I mentioned about hydro flush colonoscopy also. But in spite of that, yes, that's what is called as the undetermined group. We'll take up a little bit later when I discuss the colon now. Okay,
sir. Okay.
right.
Thank you.
Sir, if I can add here,
Yes,
sir,
yes,
Shana, sir,
definitely,
that
definitely.
in patients who are blood thinners or anticoagulants, whenever they have a GI bleed, there will be a definitive ulcer somewhere.
Hmm.
You know, because that we should be able to make out by
Pick up.
whatever investigations. It's generally it's not a diffuse ooze, what you see. It doesn't really happen. In patients with GI bleeding on any of these drugs, usually there will be an ulcer from where it bleeds. So our attempt should be to make out where the ulcer is.
I
Okay,
hope your doubt is cleared now.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So we will move on to now colon. In that there are, I'll not be talking to everything about but important some diseases. Acute colonic bleeds are mainly due to this list here. So remember, a question is asked, acute GI bleed, don't say carcinoma of the colon. Carcinoma of the colon, forget about that as a cause for acute GI bleed. All should remember diverticular as the first. There are various colitis. Angiodysplasias are the one which are important in the colon. As I said, it is the most common site, and ischemic colitis. So these are the important cause for acute. So as you know, diverticulae, this is not about talking everything about diverticulae. The bleed is arterial bleed. You should try to understand this. Whenever there is an arterial bleed, there's a very brisk bleed. Venous bleeds do not bleed much except there is portal hypertension. That's why you get so much bleeding in the portal hypertension. Otherwise, arterial bleed, for example, even in a duodenal lesion, it's basically an arterial bleed. So you should realize it's an arterial bleed. There's a neck and dome, dome. So they are the acquired diverticulae, unlike Meckel's, which has got a complete diverticulae. Try to understand the bleed in a Meckel's is due to ectopic gastric mucosal ulceration. Because it's all the layers are there, but that is an ulceration in the mucosa. Here it is the arterial bleed, either from the neck. As the diverticulae become bigger and bigger, it's a mucosal herniation. At some stage, there is a wall becomes weak where the blood vessels are penetrating, and either it's a dome or neck means it could be a pulsatile vessel itself, and the mucosa gets separated, resulting in a bleed. But there's also important thing here. These are all the risk factors also. Patients with the diverticulae with this can have a more bleeding. Aspirin, NSAID, advancing age, obese patients, lack of physical activity, and a few other things also mentioned here, including ischemic disease, chronic renal insufficiency. So advancing age patients can have all these factors, So that's the diverticular disease is quite common in all the countries, including the Western countries here. See, it forms 75%. Some interesting observation. We all know that diverticular are more common on the sigmoid on the left, but you should remember the right colon can be the source in more than 50 to 90% of the patients. So presence of the diverticulae you find in sigmoid does not mean you resect it, because he may be bleeding from the right side. The right colon diverticulae also very often have the left diverticulae. There's no doubt about that. But reason is right diverticulae have a wider neck and a wider dome. So obviously bigger the dome of that, more chances of a ulceration and the bleeding. So that is what is important here to understand, that right divertically bleeding is quite significant. Look at here. So even though incidence may be less common. So whenever endotherapy forms the most important thing for the diverticular bleed. So when we talk about endotherapy, these are the principles we also mentioned in the upper GI bleed. Doesn't matter repetition. You can inject it. Where do you inject it? So it's an active bleeding. When you see, these are some of the areas where you see a bleeder there. You can inject the epinephrine with the dilution there, monotherapy, or you can combine with the thermal coagulation, right? But this is for a non-bleeder. And if you find an adherent clot, even a dilute epinephrine can be given all around. Remember, this is a gastroenterology work. So this is one kind of a therapy of injection, epinephrine, then coagulation, and then epinephrine. Any other better? Yes, clips are better because there's no thermal damage. Whenever you put a endo clip, that's an important thing here, So there's no thermal and perforation, because even the clips, their strength is also more. You can even rotate it. So these are few advantages, of the clips which are applied, because if you are able to identify a proper bleeder. So options are endoscopic clips. And now obviously another method is band ligation. Like you have variceal band ligation, here also you can put a scope there. There's a suction apparatus that is connected to the tip. It sucks the entire the diverticulae, and even you can close the diverticulae putting a clip there, so, or a band. So these are some of the endotherapy for a diverticular bleed. So diverticular bleed should be considered as the first diagnosis of a massive bleed when you consider from the colon. So do not consider the carcinoma. And if the patient has got a pain, it is less likely that it is diverticulum. It can go with some other diagnosis. Colitis. So many colitis are there. Quickly, I have just put all those in I format there. Infectious, infestation, ischemia, inflammation, irradiation, and induced. Induced is nothing but actually what I am trying to tell. It's an antibiotic induced. Just for the sake of easy understanding, I have given you to remember 6 I's there, right? In all this, whatever colitis, basic factor is the mucosal inflammation. Sometimes they are so diffuse inflammation, it may not be confined only to one area like a diverticular bleed or a pulsating vessel, etc. So this is the problem of colitis. Luckily, most of them may even stop on their own. So mucosal inflammation I mentioned, they can have diarrhea. Most of them will have diarrhea, but blood loss tend to be mild. If you put a scope there, edema, very friability, erythema, ulcerations and all you find. But important thing in that colitis are 1 or 2 things to be remembered is the salmonella there, Campylobacter, even Shigella. These are the ones which are dangerous diarrheas, and treatment is there because more HIV patients, immunocompromised. So one has to be consider the possibility of a infective diarrhea containing blood there. So just because I am a surgeon, so I should not say that I don't want to learn this. No, as a differential diagnosis of a GI bleed, keep it in mind, especially tenderness in the abdomen means, oh, it could be related to some infections, may have a fever there. So treatment mentioned ciprofloxacin, etc. Right? So, but India has got some more of infestations. As you know, all of you, amoebic dysentery, I will not speak more about that other than that cecum is the one area you find a tenderness called amoebic typhlitis, and sigmoid is the another area where you get tenderness. That's Manson-Barr's amoebic point of tenderness. Dysentery in the form of blood and mucus, and you suspect amoebic dysentery, you find that flask-shaped ulcers, and you treat them with the metronidazole. Most of the things it stops. I know the mistakes done by one of the surgeons for removing the colon for a strongyloides infection. Remember, these are the infection more dangerous in our country there. So you can find there multiple ulcers. Sometimes they are confused with the diffuse bleeding, and they usually respond to the drugs. So this is quite common. Hyperinfections, immunocompromised individuals, even a chemotherapy patients. All these patients, you should keep it in mind. Whenever you treat the patients who have got a infective diarrhea or even with the infestations, do a simple stool examination and to rule out ultimately the important causes. One other condition which you should know, and you normally get confused this for a mesenteric vascular occlusion. No, ischemic colitis is not related to mesenteric vascular occlusion. There may be some pathology, but it causes more pain, and it is more left-sided pain, more elderly. And if you put a scope, you find mucosal ulcers there. But what are the distinguishing features? There is a clear demarcation between one area which is involved and another is the normal. And rectum is spared there. There's a longitudinal ulcer. So bleeding is self-limited, and once you correct the volume and cause, it usually stops. I just brought this to show you. Look at this point. This is called a Griffith's point. I hope all of you know. Blood supply of the colon. The ascending branch of the left colic divides again into left and right. That anastomoses with the marginal artery of Drummond. This area is called at the Griffith point. This is the area having the relatively least blood supply. So you get this mucosal irritation here. So vulnerable patients are hypertensive, smokers, as I mentioned to you, some elderly, chemotherapy patients. So this is one of the areas, and this is called ischemic colitis. Generally, once you treat the major part of the disease conservative, it stops. Importantly, other diseases have to be ruled out. I just put this picture to show you what is actually mesenteric vascular occlusion, what you get in a superior mesenteric arterial thrombosis of the vein. This is that massive gangrene, which I have spoken when I took the abdominal sepsis. So this is the one which produces massive gangrene, acute abdominal pain, hypertension, shock, collapse, blood in the stool, foul odor. This is the classical mesenteric gangrene. Inflammatory bowel diseases, ulcerative colitis and the Crohn's are the two common diseases, but the one which produces more bleeding is in the colon is obviously ulcerative colitis. Crohn's produces ulcers in the ileum, not that it cannot affect the colon, it can affect duodenum also, esophagus also. So mucosal friability, the ulcers are typically called as pinpoint ulcers because there is no normal mucosa in between. This is one of the points to differentiate a ulcerative colitis patient from some other patient. So you find multiple pinpoint ulcers, no normal mucosa, and they include a clear demarcation will be there, and rectum is usually spared, right? Typically, this is a inflammatory bowel diseases. Rectum is always involved in a patient with the ulcerative colitis, but in case of a Crohn's disease, generally it is not common, right? So you can see here multiple ulcers, you can see, and there is a in between the ulcer there is some healing taken place. This is pseudopolyposis. You can see here, no, that is the attempt of healing in between the ulcers. This is typical of a ulcerative colitis, and you can see here total colectomy has been done. This is another patient with ulcerative colitis with the massive bleeding. He also had toxic megacolon. Quickly you should know to differentiate ulcerative colitis from the Crohn's colitis. So these are the favorite question. Ulcerative colitis always starts in the rectum, but Crohn's, it starts in the ileum. Not that you can't get in the colon, you can get, but ulcers are usually linear ulcers, not those small pinpoint ulcers, etc. Sometimes they are aphthoid, they are superficial. Transmural inflammation is very characteristic of Crohn's. Here it's only mucosa and submucosa. Healing in the form of pseudopolyposis, here you don't get. Fibrotic stricture, that's why you call this as a lead pipe colon. Crohn's, you get a terminal ileal stricture. Bleeding is more common in ulcerative colitis. This is obscure bleed in a Crohn's, and importantly, usually there's no anal disease, rather no disease. It's quite common to get a anorectal disease. So you should know that inflammatory bowel diseases as a differential diagnosis for a patient who has come with the bleeding per rectum. Another R is a radiation. So get a lot of patients with the carcinoma cervix getting radiation, or even any other patient for that matter who has received radiation to the pelvis. So if at all it happens within 6 weeks, or maybe even 8 months to 9 months, even 2 years, you can call it as. This is the point we have find a diffuse oozing, multiple diffuse oozing. There's some rectal urgency and tenesmus. So this is typically called as radiation proctitis. So this is a problem which you can once in a while encounter, and conservative treatment it stops. I have given for a completion's sake, induced is nothing but antibiotics, So day and night we use the antibiotics in the hospital. You get that pseudomembranous colitis. So some of the antibiotic list is given, including cephalosporins, chemotherapy drug, clindamycin, etc. So it is mainly due to Clostridium difficile. Diarrhea is more common than the bleeding. Once you control the disease and stop these antibiotics, and usually it stops. So now the important other condition which we should know is the angiodysplasia. So in the colon, we mentioned about diverticular disease, we have mentioned about colitis, all those causes. Other important disease is angiodysplasia. They are basically, I mentioned to you, these are all the acquired lesions. Elderly patients are more vulnerable. They are basically thin-walled submucosal vessels with small capillary veins and arteries, right? So they are very, diameter is very small. So obviously, even if you do a colonoscopy and barium enema, they are usually missed. In the colon, cecum is the most common side and ascending colon. Maybe some pressure builds up and then they rupture. So it is episodic and self-limited. This is the problem as a cause of chronic blood loss. Small intestine I mentioned as the second common cause, or the overt bleed. So occult bleed, obscure and overt. Initially it may be normal, but later you may find some kind of a lesion there. So hem occult is a positive. You suspect angiodysplasia, right? So main treatment lies in the endoscopic coagulation or even a sclerotherapy. You are lucky if you are able to get it. Chances of rebleeding is always there. So angiodysplasia is always to be considered, especially when a patient is a renal failure. The reasons are given here. Somehow uremia produces a lot of platelet dysfunction. And also patient is on dialysis and he may be put on a lot of anticoagulants. All this will produce high risk bleeding. So that is what is the cause for in a chronic renal failure. I just want to bring your attention to one other drugs which are for angiodysplasia is estrogens. So I searched some literature and get some explanation here. So what does estrogen do? They increase the number of circulating platelets, and they also potentiate sympathetic activity by causing some vasoconstrictions, and they promote vascular endothelial regeneration. So the role of I have no experience with this, but the role of estrogens in controlling the angiodysplasia. Very often some confusion happens between angiodysplasia and telangiectasis. There is a difference. I mentioned angiodysplasia only can cutaneous and mucous membrane involvement occurs in telangiectasia, whereas in angiodysplasia only GI tract mucosa is involved. These people can get even epistaxis. So the hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasis, one of the examples here. So where you can get a telangiectasis. There are a few other syndromes. So once in a while, when they ask you vascular causes of the GI bleeding, angiodysplasia is one of the cause, followed by telangiectasis other than the bleeding disorders. So this is the reason why I brought this here. So colon cancer, this is not the place to talk more about the colon cancer. All of you know that bleeding is mainly due to some ulceration, proliferative growth, erosion. Is usually low grade, intermittent, fresh blood from the left side, altered blood or even maroon color from the right side. A familial polyposis coli patient with the blood and mucus in the stool were managed for almost one year. For some reason, they could not do the colonoscopy and found to have a multiple carcinomas. So just to keep you informed, this is typical barium and this is the proliferative growth. Look at the cecum is here and ascending colon. I just brought this slide just to show for postgraduates. If you look at this, this is not carcinoma, pulled up cecum, this is tuberculosis, and this is a look of a tuberculous ulcers. Again, I repeat here, look at this, and this is carcinoma, and this is pulled up cecum, this is tuberculosis, right? Again, break the monotony. Any postgraduate, if you have Just can you answer this question? Some suspected case of carcinoma of the colon. Some colonoscopy is being done. He had just entered the hepatic flexure, and this is his finding. This is a quiz question. So, can anybody unmute if you know the think? You have done a colonoscopy. Just cross the hepatic flexure. Anybody? It is not that difficult. You just clue is there in the second picture. Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
So this is intersusception.
Excellent. Congratulations. This is intersusception. So you can see this is a typical small intestine, right? So this carcinoma of the cecum is notorious. I am showing you the lead point there is gone in. Somebody trying to push there. There's a demonstration. So cecum is notorious for intersusception, anemia, can present even as appendicitis. So anyway, that was the same case. This is at surgery intersusception. And remember, cecum is usually missed because again, you try to go up to the colonoscopy and you miss somewhere in hepatic flexure. And if you are not done investigations properly. This is a hepatic flexure with the colectomies. And this is a left colon. I think I will not, this is for completion's sake, carcinoma of the colon. I'll be taking only another 5-10 minutes. So in the colon, most important things are diverticular disease, I mentioned to you, angiodysplasias to be mentioned, colitis in the various forms, I mentioned to you various forms of colitis, and ischemic colitis. Carcinoma of the colon is always to be considered as a diagnosis of a intermittent bleeds and a very limited bleeds and of course anemia. So all of you know very well about this. When there's a splash, it is hemorrhoids. When there's a painful, it is fissure. And I mentioned about the carcinoma of blood and mucus. There's only one slide on hemorrhoids. So this is the typical bleeding. Don't do the mistake. You will not feel hemorrhoids unless they are thrombosed. And you will see hemorrhoids only when you are taken out the inner. This is the obturator is there. So your outer sheath is there, inner obturator you are removed. As you are withdrawing, you will see. So you will only see. There are 3 blunders which one should not do for a hemorrhoids. Suddenly don't do the hemorrhoidectomy and the patient is on anticoagulants. You see that patient has got a massive bleed there. So difficult to manage. So it's a very tough job. So always take the history. Many of the patients are on anticoagulants, aspirin. Second, don't take it lightly because suddenly you do a hemorrhoidectomy and bleeds. The pedicle has to be ligated properly, right? If you have got a harmonic scalpel, it does a good job here. Otherwise, a good ligation. And don't diagnose hemorrhoids for a rectal varices due to portal hypertension, and you will be in a trouble because of the portal pressure. So I have brought this one picture here to show you somebody on anticoagulants, somehow missed, somebody did a biopsy of the prostate, they went through the rectal varices, and this patient, they managed almost, you can see that this is a Foley catheter bulb with 6 to 8 units of blood and so complicated. So please remember one thing, always whenever you have a hemorrhoids, these are the 3 blunders we should not commit, and don't miss a carcinoma above. Minimum is a PR, proctoscopy and left-sided sigmoidoscopy, right? So solitary rectal ulcer syndrome is another rare entity. So it occurs in the anterior wall. There's some heaped up mucosa there, trauma or intersusception or a prolapse, whatever be the cause. And usually with the conservative treatment, it stops. If it is really bleeding, you can even go to endotherapy. So I just given you quick look. Look at that small pinpoint ulcers, ulcerative colitis. Some bigger ulcers, aphthoid ulcers. These are transmural inflammation. These are more deeper, these are superficial. No intervening healthy mucosa. Here mucosa is normal. This is tuberculosis. This is extensive tubercular lesions. These are all multiple polyps. This was one of them, or pedunculated polyps. This is another polyp. These are diverticulae. These are amoebic ulcers. They may look superficial. They may have a flask shape, by definition, deeper ulcers. These are a few images for your quick revision whenever you get a bleed. So what has changed in the over a period of time for this bleeds? What we are talking is one group I mentioned in the first slide. Undetermined means in spite of all this investigation, some of the studies when they project, the group is still there, 6%, 8%, 10%. But if you follow this patient further with the repeated investigation, that number will come down. That is coming down now. Mortality also come down because of the diagnosis and resuscitation and better understanding. Once upon a time, I myself also have done what's called blind subtotal colectomy. I have done, because when you do a blind subtotal, we used to remove the right colon, because right colon is the site for the angiodysplasia up to the entire sigmoid, because these are before the days of colonoscopy. So, but nowadays nobody does a blind colectomy. You are diagnosing more angiodysplasias of various facilities are available. Role of endotherapy is becoming more common, so more control of the blood, provided you have a medical gastroenterology, and because most of them have got also intervention radiology backup, right? So with this, before I conclude, I have got the last second clinical case capsule. Any one of you, please unmute yourself. I have a second case capsule. One of you.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, please read.
56-year-old male, smoker with complaints of pain abdomen since 4 days, continuous aching, diffuse vomiting present, melena 1 attack. He is on aspirin and statin for hypertriglyceridemia. Few attacks of abdominal pain and melena since 2 months, for which he undergone upper and lower GI endoscopy, which was normal. On examination, he was paler and hypertensive.
So this is a patient of 56-year-old. My patient only smoker. So upper and lower GI bleed, colonoscopy done 2 times. Everything is normal. But remember the age. Remember he's a smoker. So this is how we start with the what 1 or 2 possibilities you will come to your mind. It's difficult to predict, but roughly elderly patient. So
Carcinoma.
so we think of carcinoma. Carcinoma, is it difficult to diagnose carcinoma colon if you do a colonoscopy?
No, sir, we can diagnose.
So you forget about carcinoma. Colonoscopy normal means even diverticulae is ruled out. See, divertical bleeding is different from diverticulae. At least they would have made a note diverticulae present. So polyps are ruled out. Carcinoma is ruled out. Diverticulae are ruled out. What is to be considered are the so-called the obscure bleeds. Upper GI scopy is normal, so which we are not talking. So this is how you try to think. Patient is a smoker. Does it give you some idea? 56-year-old man, he is getting abdominal pain, melena, 2 months. Does it give you any clue?
Sir, ischemic colitis.
Yes, very good. See, somebody come out with the ischemic colitis is one answer. He has got melena. So in that direction, patient is also on aspirin and statins, right? So remember, this is a diffuse. So we let us proceed. What do you want to do in that case? So this has been done. Hemoglobin is 8, but ultrasound said some distended proximal loop. Ultrasound I never mentioned in the evaluation of this entire, because but it is considered as a extended arm of a surgeon, right? So somebody asked for a CECT scan. Looking at that, I will just put the picture. I hope can one of you start reading that? Kavi Prabhano, please start reading.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. At least I will give you a clue. D2, D3 means you know what it is. So duodenum, D1,
Yes,
D2, D3. Do you think it is dilated here?
It is dilated, sir.
See, look here. Yes. Now, can you trace that further? 1 or 2 pictures. See here, you trace that. What is this white thing you are seeing here? Just look at this. This structure in the center. almost in the center. Sorry? Very
Aortic
good. Very good. This is the aortic calcification. See that? Whole thing is calcified. So don't confuse this. The purpose of bringing this picture is that. So this
Yes,
is
sir.
aortic calcification. So idea of atherosclerosis, smoker, elderly, intermittent pain, somebody is suspected ischemic colitis, no problem.
Ischemic colitis. Yes.
No, let us not be in a hurry. But now this is how you trace, right? So now there are some more pictures. Now what is the difference between this here and this here? Look at this.
Lumen size is.
So very much grossly lumen size is narrowed. So this is how you analyze the case, right? We
Yes,
don't
sir.
have much pictures to show you the superior mesenteric, etc. But also there is one picture here. So you can see here, there's one more area they have pinpointed and they have shown some narrowing has taken place here, right? So this is the area. So that is how you make a diagnosis. Probably this is. Now can you see the superior mesenteric artery here? See the
Yes, sir.
calcification? There's a calcification there. This is the aorta. All right. So
Yes,
this is how you see the image carefully. And can you read the report?
Circumferential thickening and narrowing of 13 cm long jejunal segment just distal to ligament of Treats. No evidence of bowel ischemia. Aortic calcification with calcification at SMA origin with no narrowing or thrombosis. Enteroscopy biopsy, non-specific enteritis. Stopped smoking and aspirin and statins were changed. He improved.
So the purpose of showing this pictures are to tell you that clinically we make a diagnosis definitely ischemic colitis or something from the small bowel, and the CT showed like this. So, but in spite of that, there was also doubt of a malignancy here. Even enteroscopy, luckily the facility was available, and they were very sure that it was non-specific enteritis. And interestingly, he stopped smoking. And even aspirin and statins were changed, drug dosage. So, and he improved. And he went home without surgery. At least I had a follow-up of this patient for 2 years. I do not know what happened to him later. I just want to bring your attention to realize that investigations are available. You should know when to use what investigation so that you have avoided a laparotomy in this type of a patients. Otherwise, you would have easily missed. So, to conclude, lower GI bleeding is a common problem. You should first make out is it a upper GI bleed or not, and also you should make out it is a acute acute colonic bleeding or not. Acute are the causes are different, chronic are different. Always remember the midgut. I mentioned about the black continent, obscure causes. Enteroscopy, capsule endoscopy are the investigations which are available. Yes, enteroscopy is more difficult. I mentioned about the balloon endoscopies. Maybe Dr. Radhakrishna will give more some details about that, whether it's really used very often. But remember, angiodysplasias, always elderly people. They are not congenital lesions. They are always acquired. Cecum and the small intestine, the favorite sites. If you don't have colonoscopy, you can do a CT angiogram to pick up those lesions. Divertical bleeding, ischemic colitis, they are common. And hemorrhoids, I gave you 2-3 important things about the hemorrhoids. You should not be confused for rectal varices. Anticoagulant history, you should ask whenever you go ahead with the hemorrhoids treatment, and a carcinoma should never be missed. I mentioned about the last that undetermined group is slowly becoming less and less. If you follow that patient, you'll be all right. So these are all my references, and this is the last slide. Thank you very much. If you have any feedbacks, you can send, and some comments, and if any questions are there, please feel free to ask.
Any questions and comments on lower GI bleeding?
Hello, sir.
Yeah, please.
Sir, what is the difference between occult and obscure bleed, sir? Both are
Occult
same.
blood loss is you do the stool examination, you find the blood, that is called as occult is hidden. Occult.
Okay. Yes,
So
sir.
I think I have given you in the initial the definition of obscure, where you have done a lot of scopies. You have done the lot of scopies and you are not able to get the diagnosis, and that time you call them as a obscure breeds. So that's a small intestine I mentioned to you. Somewhere I have given you the definition, right? Yeah. So where is that? Yeah, it's here. So you can see there, no? Bleeding which persists. That means in a patient who has got a occult blood, there is a patient doesn't know there is a bleeding, but there is a stool examination or whatever, or anemia, there is bleeding. But in
Okay.
case of an obscure patient may tell, I have got past blood, but you do the initial examination, upper GI scopy and scopy, it is normal. Clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Not. So then there is obscure occult and obscure overt. Overt means once the bleeding is you investigated, not found, later you when you do the scopy you find a visible bleeding, right?
Okay, sir.
Sir, if there are no more questions, then thanks once again, sir, for a wonderful lecture, a complete, thorough lecture, and then thank you, and then
This
we'll see you again.
double balloon and double balloon scopies are done regularly.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We have single balloon as well as double balloon, and I mean not very regularly because
Yes.
these are done in very occasionally
Correct.
in
That's what
GI bleeding, and it's a very tedious process. It's done under
I know.
anesthesia.
It's
One
difficult.
balloon holds the bowel,
Ah,
and then the scope is passed forward. Then that balloon is deflated, the other balloon is inflated. It's just like climbing a ladder, little by little,
Okay.
little by little,
Okay.
and you go all the way. And then it's quite a traumatic thing.
I know.
Obscure GI bleeding again is, the scope itself will cause some sort of a trauma. It's not very easy to make out.
I had experienced only one case of my case that pictures which I put was done by our gastroenterologist for the double balloon scope.
Sir, good evening, sir.
Good evening. Yeah, tell me.
Sir, got one doubt, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, how to differentiate rectal varices from hemorrhoids clinically, sir?
Clinically.
Yes, sir.
Clinically, of course, patient may have evidence of portal hypertension, number one. Number
Yes, sir.
two, the typical hemorrhoids are just above the dentate line. That means they are, above within 2 or 3 centimeters. When you put the scope, you will find. Rectal, they occur in the rectum, whereas the usual hemorrhoids, they occur in the upper anal canal, popularly called as surgical anal canal. These are red ones. They are small cherry-like, and they usually prolapse as soon as you withdraw the inner obturate. Okay, rectal varices are little bit bigger ones, and they are little, they are thick also, and color also. I have found that they are little bit of altered color compared to hemorrhoids.
Yes, sir.
Any other explanation, Dr. Radhakrishna, for this?
No, but that's the complete explanation, sir. As you rightly said, there should be evidence of portal hypertension, and they are slightly higher up than lower down, and they're quite slightly deeper, and then they don't extend onto external hemorrhoids the way you see internal. There's no any skin evidence, skin tags, or external internal hemorrhoids will not be there, and obviously portal hypertension should be associated.
Thank you.
Not very easy to control bleeding also.
Oh God, it was.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we'll come to an end to this session, sir. A lovely session, and then thank you. Thanks for the effort, and thanks for the time. Thank you. Thanks everyone.